Hey everyone, we've had an interesting question about patterns of the mind and how they end. I'll read it out. Hi Claire. So if the selfing patterns, and by that we mean the patterns that are a product of this sense of separation, so a product of feeling isolated or alone or needing control or insecure, the patterns of the self identity. So if the selfing patterns are established over years of habitual thinking, in brackets, neurons that fire together, wire together, does it require a certain amount of willpower to not slip into these patterns? Or is willpower an activity of the self as well? You often speak of beliefs and behaviors falling away. Does this happen through witnessing patterns and staying with uncomfortable feelings in the body alone? Is vigilance needed at this point to not slip into story making? Yeah, great. Great question. So articulate. So fundamentally, the question really is what ends the patterns of insecurity, of seeking, of a self-identity, trying to secure itself. And it seems to me that the only thing that ends them is when they no longer make sense. And because if we think that all behavior is optimum, it's absolutely right, all behavior is perfect. And I don't mean that in a moral sense or even in a flourishing sense. I mean it in the sense that the behavior is the product of what is believed, what's understood in that moment, what's needed in that moment. And so behavior comes from that always. So it's perfect in the sense that it's perfect for the landscape or the foundation that it's come from. And so for behavior to change, it can only be because that background space of belief and understanding, of need, insecurity, of shame, of seeking, of desperation has changed. That's the only way things fundamentally change. Because otherwise, so the listener mentioned willpower, and that does have an effect, doesn't it? So we start the year on our diets, not drinking, not smoking, exercising, but it will last to the extent that there is effort and energy available and force to make it happen. If the background space hasn't changed, then that behavior is isolated and it actually makes no sense. And I'm talking whether it's like an action or even a thought pattern. If the background space of understanding hasn't shifted, then that behavior is in isolation, it's not supported, and it actually doesn't make sense. It's not optimum, really. It's an anomaly. It's a forced effort. And what is interesting is sometimes that forced effort changes the background space, because this is totally dynamic, isn't it? This whole thing that we're talking about, is sometimes, for example, I talk a lot about moving into the things that scare us so that we see, so that the concepts of them can't exist in the same way they used to. And often that's staying present in the fear, staying present and doing the thing, that requires bravery. It requires some act of conscious will to do the presentation or to invite someone out on a date or to ask someone for something. It requires a deep breath and a moving in. And that can be enough to change the whole conceptual landscape, because we see that the reaction from the other wasn't what we were expecting. We see that in the doing, our old concept of self starts to change. And so it's a dynamic, fluid thing. But it's interesting, for the continuation of that behavior, it's absolutely a requirement that the background, call it the back room, it's like this back foundation of all our experience, the sort of the hardware, I guess we could say, that the software is running on, that has to change eventually. Otherwise we keep doing the scary thing, but because we may be doing it, we're doing the scary thing, but there's such rigidity of belief in it that's just taken with us, so nothing changes. There's no openness. So it's just force of doing, but with no space, no openness, no presence for the back room, for the hardware to actually change. Yeah. So in other words, behavior, patterns, habits, addictions, furrows of thought, furrows of belief will continue as long as they make sense for this back room. And so there's two options, just to sum up. Either the back room changes initially, so that changes, and then everything else changes because of that. And it might, these old patterns might continue, they might have a sort of residual momentum, but again, there'll be anomalies. And it's why I think as we're in this conversation more and more, our behavior starts to look really incongruous, like our anger, or our jealousy, or these habits that don't nourish the physical, whereas before they were completely unnoticed because they made so much sense. They couldn't even be seen. There were such obvious things to do. They were so inevitable. But now the backroom is shifting, and these ways of thinking, these ways of reacting, ways of behaving, just like, why is that even happening? And that moment of noticing them is really like the signal of the end of them, because they just don't make sense. So either this background changes, and that changes, it seems to me, from deep insight, from curiosity, from exploration, from being like road to Damascus revelations, just, often that happens, doesn't it? Just like a bolt from the blue and the whole thing has shifted. It can change from hitting rock bottom. That happens to a lot of people as well, just that nowhere else to go, and the patent realization that old search was futile, that nothing could have been found. So there's lots of ways the background shifts. Subliminals, I think, to do an amazing role in amplifying the background space so that it becomes more obviously the only truth, and then behavior shifts from there. Yeah. Or, as I said, the background can shift from this sort of conscious effort of willpower to see, to show that the conceptual reality was not true. There's a nice recording with Rupert Spira talking to someone with anorexia and bulimia, talking about holding still, just holding still in the center of that urge, just to see what the urge is, to see who we are beyond it. And that can be a powerful way of of um of shifting the whole understanding of what we are and what we have to do and what's necessary. Yeah. So that seems to me where these habits of selfing dissolve. Yeah. And above all, I guess we would say it's from presence, from that again, we say it over and over, but the that shift from stress and suffering, taking us deeper into the story, to it being the signal to watch, really watch what is going on in that whole mental landscape. Yeah, yeah, great question. Thank you. Bye.